What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Lumix Live this week. Bit more of a kind of heavy information planned stream this week. As the title says, obviously we're going to be talking about GH6 as the kind of core platform for the discussion, since it has everything that we kind of offer as far as storage and recording options and so on and so forth. So I'm using that as my kind of demo camera. I've got it all hooked up here. So that we can actually go through, talk about the menus, what different recording options can go to different storage solutions, but then also actually talk about the different storage solutions, because there is a lot of, I think, confusing information out there when it comes to what what storage is good to use, what we recommend, where do we have a list that has that information. So yeah, this is going to be pretty information heavy. But just like always, for every single one of the streams, if you have questions, drop them in the chat, just like you're seeing a couple people do. Tag that Lumix USA so I can see them and we can kind of address them as we go through. But yeah, before we jump in too far into that, reminder of Lumix Pro services. Here in the US, we have Red and Platinum. Red tier is free if you purchased a Lumix camera. Get yourself registered on Lumix Pro services Red. You can either follow the QR code or the link down in the description. If you want that next level of service and support, make sure to take a look at Platinum. Platinum gets you 2-day repairs with free shipping next day for both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs, a welcome kit, annual sensor cleanings, and lens calibrations. All of that stuff that you would normally expect from a professional camera, professional piece of equipment for support should something ever go wrong. Yeah, so let's kind of drop through here to some of the questions and answer. I know that there were questions that got submitted over the last couple of weeks, some that I've been able to get to, some that I have not been able to get to. So let's kind of go through some of these before we jump in. Martin, I really hope that Panasonic, the destination card slot, which caused nothing but a 10+ second delay when you have to change it. Martin, if you could remind me what your request was. Honestly, I've had too many things going on at once recently that I need a little bit of a refresher. If you give me a refresher, I can maybe provide an update for you. Harry, before you drive into the GH6, can you exchange custom setting profiles from the S5 Mark II to the S5 Mark II X via SD card? This is a good question. As far as camera saved setting files go, you cannot. Saved camera setting files have to go between two cameras of the exact same make and model. The reason for this is usually just down to the fact that if you saved settings on, say, an S5 Mark II X for, say, external SSD recording, and then you go to load it on an S5 Mark II, well, it doesn't have SSD recording and it's not going to get it. So it won't know what to do with that setting. So it matches and makes sure that the model numbers are the same. And then some other stuff as well. So if you have settings on an S5 Mark II, you won't be able to carry them to a Mark II X or vice versa. It's the same with like GH6s, GH5s, GH5 Mark IIs, GH5Ss, all the cameras that we can do that with. It's same model to same model. Let's see here. I've saved stills configuration, C1, etc. on my S5 Mark II. Is it possible to exchange the exposure mode? I only see exposure mode video, thanks. The custom settings, when you're saving them on the Lumix cameras, you have to put it into the mode that you want to save. So if you want to save C1 as aperture, then you got to put the camera into aperture, set it up the way you want, save it to C1 through whatever. If you want to change that to manual, you would have to put the camera into the M manual mode, then save that setting out. Video is different because video is software set for aperture, shutter, program, or manual. There's no way to do it after you've already set up C1 through whichever number you're going to. DJ Electric, how are you guys going to manage the list of certified drives? The one for PD chargers at least had a clear 9-volt 3-amp. Demand SSDs wild, very, yeah. They have a lot of issues with speeds and validations and all that stuff. And we are going to jump into that in a few minutes, actually. So yeah, hang tight. I will be able to get that stuff. Why does it not just retry the other slot before giving the error? Makes no sense when even the higher data rates can be saved to the SD card. So why user have to be asked to adjust it? Okay, so I am going to go into this a little bit when I talk about data rates and recording modes, because this is where some of the major misunderstandings are coming from, with assuming that SD cards can record higher than they can. The numbers that you see printed on cards and stuff like that do not necessarily mean what you think they mean, for the most part. I'm not saying you, Martin, but a lot of people get this kind of confused, and then it starts to spread through that, you know, hey, well, this card says it should be able to do this, and while theoretically, yes, does not mean that accounting for everything, they'll be able to do it. Let's see here. Jack Russell, since I didn't get my reply on the last S5 Mark II stream, I'll try off topic here. That's okay. Yep, that's okay. When is Live View Composite coming to the S5 Mark II? Soon. We should have more information about that actually pretty soon for you. So just kind of keep your ear to the ground, keep following us. Hopefully within the coming weeks, we'll be able to talk about it, and you guys will be really excited about it. So, let's see here. Zizo, does a V90 card from a GH5 for 400 megabits per second be up to the task for the S5 Mark II or a new GH6 version? Yes and no. It has a V90. The reason I say yes and no is that, well, one, yes, V90 has enough kind of overhead for its minimum write speeds or minimum sustained write speeds to cover everything that's in the S5 Mark II. On the GH6, it does not. On a GH6, there are recording options that exceed even V90's specification for read-write and for sustained write speeds. So when you look at a camera like the GH6, like we've got here, we have 3 media options that you can record to on that camera. You can either record to SD card, which, as you pointed out, V90. And I have a V90 card here. So V90 works with that camera. You can record most options on the camera. But if you want to go to the highest end recording, you need to go to something like CF Express. So CF Express cards, different format. If I go to my SD card, obviously different format if you've never purchased one of these before. They give you a lot of speed and storage with some caveats. One, they get really hot by comparison, but also your capacity causes very different speed ratings depending on how large they go. So will a V90 work for 400 megabits per second? Yes, absolutely. That is what we recommend. When you go to a camera like the GH6 here, if I go into the camera menu and we take a look at the actual video recording options here, you'll see a couple of interesting things when I change the camera over to the MOV recording format. You'll see that as I scroll down, we now have these 2 different options here when it comes to C4K. You have an H and an L option. The L option is, if you notice, 600 megabits per second. And then the H option is 800 megabits per second. This becomes a very, very important distinction to determine what media source you want to use. The reason for this is that while V90 is stated to do 90 megabytes per second as a minimum write speed, the most you can get out of that when it comes to reliability on the camera side is about 600 megabits per second. Anything over that, and you are in territory where there's no guarantee that the card is actually going to be able to keep up with the recording speed or with the data speed that you're sending to the device. It also adds in another kind of challenge as well, because while memory cards are rated for V60, V90, there are other parts of the specification that have to be in line on the SD Association for the cameras to actually be able to utilize the speeds that they're rated for. One of the kind of key things is that if you were to take, say, a no-name brand card that is claiming it's V90, it may be that it can sustain 90 megabytes per second on the actual NAND flash, but the controller on that card may not be telling the camera the proper amount of storage that it has as the buffer to then load to the storage on the card. When something like that happens, that's where you get corrupt files, you lose information on it. And that's why we put out the list of cards that we have validated. And it's the same thing that we're going to be doing with the SSDs. Because of these kind of issues, that's where I say, like, yes, V90 will work on both S5 Mark II and the GH6, but it does become more complicated because it depends on the actual bit rates that you're going to record at. When we look at, say, the ProRes options in the GH6, so I'll go back to my GH6 here, and let's go change this to ProRes. We look at the ProRes options that the GH6 offers, you'll see that all of these have to be recorded to the CF Express card until I get down to the full HD options. Full HD options, because they max out at 454 megabits per second. It's a little bit higher than our all-intra 400 megabit. These are well within the standards that the SD Association can read for V90 cards. So yeah, you want to make sure you're at V90. You want to make sure you're at that kind of whole setup, and you should be good to go from there. Let's see here. Let's see here. Nice to catch your live stream. Nice for you to catch, Colton. That's awesome. On different forum, users discussing about it's the same situation as occurring on this issue. There's not really much more I can say about it. I would recommend you to go back and look at some of the previous streams that we've done and the different topics about it. All CMOS sensors can exhibit that situation. Do we have hope for getting live LUTs on the GH6 in the near future? I don't know. The real-time LUT functionality launched in the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II X are pretty specific to those cameras at this moment, but I think depending on how big of a response we get from everybody will determine whether or not we put the resources into bringing that to some of the other cameras, and also whether or not the cameras can do it. I don't know if it's something specific with the new engine that we're running in the S5 Mark II and the Mark II X versus what we run in like the GH6, so I'd have to work with the engineers to see on that. I guess I have another one. I was an EM1 Mark III MFT user years ago, and I could put the camera through rough scenarios when it comes to getting wet on dusty conditions. What can I do with the S5 Mark II? Well, the S5 Mark II, the GH6, the current, higher end cameras, they're weather resistant. We don't give IP ratings on the cameras because, one, it's kind of ridiculous. You have a gigantic hole in the front of the camera that your IP rating means nothing if your lens is not properly sealed, and there's too many other variables involved with it. But yeah, you want to take the camera out, light rain, you should be fine. I've gone out shooting in the snow when it's been drizzling and, kind of lightly raining here in Austin. And it's been perfectly fine. I've never run into a problem with the camera. As an example, I had, when we were first working with the S5 platform, I had taken it when I was living back up in New Jersey. I had taken it to Patterson Falls, and had the camera out next to the frozen, rainwater water that's coming up, mist, that's the word, covering the camera, and it was perfectly fine. The most important thing is you have to make sure that all the port doors are covered. So what I mean by that is you want to make sure that all of these covers are closed, that everything is kind of just all sealed up, that you have this cover on it, that as far as the card door is set, you're closed, that the lens is actually a sealed lens that's going to cover it. As long as you have that kind of stuff, you should be perfectly fine. Don't change lenses. It's kind of the same thing that you would do with the EM1 series. Don't change lenses, don't do stuff like that, and you should be okay. But yeah, they're going to be fine. The only difference with the S5 platform is it's a 0 degree rating instead of negative 10 degrees like the S1 platform is. So yeah, should be okay there. Let's see here. Hood says, will the S5 2X be able to record all codecs to the SSD? Yeah, pretty much. SSD recording on the S5 Mark IIX is going to be very similar to what we have on the GH6. Big difference being that the GH6 had CF Express cards built into it as well, so you could still internally record some different functionality. The Mark IIX, because you'll be able to do up to 800 megabits per second in all intra, on the internal all intra codecs. That what I was just saying about the GH6 should be a clear indication that, look, you've got up to 600 megabits per second can be written to SD cards. Anything over that needs to go to a different media source, whether that's CF Express or SSD. ProRes options, we've got our ProRes options already in the GH6 that we've had for a while now. So full HD is up to 454, so you'll be able to do that to SD cards. Anything over that, you're exceeding the limitations of what SD cards are able to write to. So you would go to an external SSD. On the GH6, like we've said, you can't do anything over 60p to the SD card or to the SSD. Part of that is actually more down to power management. SSDs, when you attach them, draw power. You have to power them for them to work. So you start to run into basically power limitations where the higher the frame rate you're sending, the more data you're sending to it, the higher the power state has to be for a drive. And at some point, you do just run out of power to be able to distribute across the entire system. So yeah, you've got up to 60p recording to the SSDs. The S5 Mark IIX will do 1080 120, so you would still, and it's at a lower bit rate, so you're still going to be doing that to an SD card. But yeah, pretty straightforward as far as that goes. Let's see here. So hopefully that answers your question, Hood. Dave, got my first flash, Godox V863. When I use it with the S5 II on the hot shoe, I no longer see the actual exposure preview. Is there a way of showing live exposure with flash? This is something that I've seen a lot of people ask about, and I guess I still try to wrap my head around the understanding of this, because if you have a flash and you are going to be firing the flash, you cannot preview that exposure without firing the flash. So technically, when you have the flash on and constant preview is showing you maybe a dark image, it is showing you the exposure preview of the camera. It has no way to guess what the flash is going to do to that image to give you an exposure. I understand that there may be different ways to think about that, and we've brought it up to the engineers, but outside of that, that's really all I've kind of got for that one at the moment. Let's see here. Oh, where'd we go? Could you kindly explain how AF works, if at all, when shooting C4K 100 or 120 FPS on the GH6? Yeah, so the AF system works like you'd expect. So if I go into MOV, go to my settings here, if I come down, and actually I've never tested this attached to this ATEM, so hopefully it's going to work. Oh, dynamic range is on. Let me turn dynamic range boost off. I haven't had to reset my settings in such a long time on this camera, because I don't really ever shoot 4K 120. On my cameras, at least. If I can remember exactly where DR boost functionality is. There it is. Alright, so if I come back in here, like we were saying, we'll go filtering. Let's change this to 120p. Let's do C4K 120 frame. Does this freak out my switcher? Okay, no, it doesn't freak out my switcher. Okay, so yeah, the focusing system, it's going to function just like the rest of the system works. When you click in, you've got your different focus modes. The only difference that you'll run into with the 120 frames per second is that the subject detection does not function when you're using the ultra high speed modes. So you would go to like one area plus instead of, say, full area. And yeah, you've got that that kind of control there. It's gonna still give you autofocus. It's gonna function like it does in all the other modes. So there's not really any difference there than if you're shooting like 4K 24 or 4K 60, things like that. When are we going to get B-RAW for the GH6? I edit and Resolve, and ProRes RAW is not an option. Please, please. Honestly, no clue what's going on with B-RAW. I know that we, like you've seen in our previous cameras, we've got it in, you know, the S5, the S1s. We've got it in the GH5 series. I think something to remember is that the GH6 and the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX, they all use a very different processor. So it's a totally different ecosystem than what we've used in the previous cameras. And whenever you make a change like that, well, between that and also sensors, when you make those changes, it can take a while to redo the work that you've done on previous engines if it's not just a copy over this, you know, function over to the new processor. It doesn't always kind of work that way. Think of it more as going from, say, a Mac to a PC and a PC to a Mac as far as architectures for the processors. One is ARM-based, one is x86. Not saying that the cameras are like that, but you usually either have to do some translation between the two, or you have to completely start fresh and rewrite for the new processor. So as far as, you know, things like B-RAW, they were, you know, we've done them on our previous Venus engine. Now that we're in the L squared engine, some things are just going to take longer if they're even going to happen. So unfortunately, that's really the only information I've got for you. I know that there are programs out there that can let you transcode ProRes upon import into Resolve. I think, I can't remember the name of the company, but I think it's Film Convert has a plugin that will let you do it, that converts it to just ProRes 444. I know that that's kind of defeating the purpose of RAW, but that's at least one workaround for the time being. Super random question here, but this is GH6 and the S5 and newer cameras have a slightly different shaped hot shoe mount. My generic ones don't fit. Nope, it's the same hot shoe mount. Yeah. Nothing has changed there. Okay, so with storage, you know, we had said, going back into kind of that side of the conversation. I know, you know, we're talking about a couple of different things, storage solutions and recording options this week. As I had said, there are various different things that you kind of have to keep in mind when you're going to be looking at, you know, what storage you want to use for your camera. And we've built in a number of different tools on platforms like the GH6, and then, you know, also like the S5 Mark II, the Mark IIX, a lot of the cameras moving forward. We've built in now a pretty straightforward way of saying, like, hey, this is the media you can use for this recording. So when you look, we already covered that the low, the C4K in this case, we're at all intra, and it's the 600 megabits per second. On the left-hand side of it, you'll see that you have a 1 and a 2. It's telling you which card slots can work for that particular media, or that particular resolution. And then when we go up to the H, that 800 megabits per second, you'll see that right now it's saying recordable slot is 1. So you can only do it to the CF Express card. There is also the other options here, where if I'm going to want to be able to record on something to say SSDs, because like we said, we've added SSD support on the GH6, and the S5 Mark IIX is going to support SSDs as well. This is where you now have the option to literally come in and say, hey, turn SSD recording on. It changes the system over, and it looks for an SSD. When you come into here and then go back into the recording options, you'll see that now it's saying, hey, you can record this to all of those options that you've enabled. Your H option can either go to CF Express or SSD. You kind of have to pick which one you want to use. But we've tried to make it fairly straightforward to actually know which device you can use for that actual storage. And when it comes to the storage that you actually want to use for the particular camera, this is where we've actually kind of already posted some pretty straightforward sites and pieces of information about storage. So the GH6, this is our support site. I'll drop this in the chat right after this little part of it. But we've gone through that process of validating and testing cards and CF Express cards, SSDs, to confirm that they work with the cameras. So if you're looking at SD cards, like I said, we have validated these are the cards that we've run through validation with. There are some notes that you want to kind of keep an eye on with different media cards. So in this case, the Sony SF cards, there are batches of them out there that have a star marked in the lower left side. If you have a card like that, do not use it in our camera. It is going to cause you problems. And then like even with some of the SanDisk cards, you kind of just have to look at them, see which ones you've got, whether or not they're matched on this particular model number. But everything on this list has been validated. We've run through it, tested it. It works the way they're supposed to, and it keeps up with the bit rates that we have on the cameras. So in this case, for SD cards, it's up to 600 megabits per second. We also have been adding more and more of the CF Express cards for storage. So recently, we've added Next Storage. We've added the Diamond series from Lexar. And then even some of the SanDisk ones. But again, you want to make sure that you just kind of double check and make sure that that you understand those different notes. So for number 3, like SanDisk's 64 gig drive for CF Express, we have validated it. And as far as video goes, we cannot recommend that card. However, up to 800 megabits per second, that card works fine. So we're trying to be very clear with the kind of storage information. And when the S5 Mark II X is released and the rest of the information's out about it, we'll have an updated version of this for that camera as well. So make sure to just kind of keep an eye out. Like I said, I'm going to drop this link in the chat in a minute so that you'll have access to this. And then when we go down further, you start looking at SSDs. So this was one of the questions earlier is, well, what about SSDs? How do you validate and test an SSD for verification? There's varying different things that go into what makes an SSD work. Does it have DRAM? Is it a DRAM-less cache? Is it, designed for portable use? What's the power, requirements of it? What a USB connection does it use? So to start with, the process of validating an SSD is a very labor-intensive process because we're testing every function of the camera. If we show something on this list, it means that we have validated for everything that the camera does that it's intended to do, that those drives will work based on our testing. So if you look like the Samsung T7s, these are some of the most common drives that I think everyone has. I mean, let's be honest here. I've got one like right here that I use currently that I've been playing around with. So we all know that drive has been around for a while, that it works really well. It's what a lot of people use, but they're becoming impossible to find. So we have gone through the process to try to validate the T7 Shield drives. And while we still don't have validation for those because they function different than the T5 drives do. But we've done a lot of validation with SanDisk recently. If you saw the video from NAB, we talked about the collaboration that we've done with SanDisk and with Condor Blue around the ProBlade system. So that is the drives that I'll show you those in a second. Those have been validated fully up to 2 terabytes as well. And we've also learned a lot about, what it is that makes the SanDisk drives super reliable. So we're also able to make sure and validate that the E81s and E61s are going to work fine for the GH6. And again, these are validations that you're going to see shown on the S5 Mark II X when we get to the point that the rest of the information about that camera is going to be made public. So take a look at that link. I will drop that in the chat right now. Again, this is the GH6 compatibility list. So that's the GH6 compatibility list. That's all SD, CF Express, and SSDs. You can use that as a good base that if it's validated on the GH6, you should be pretty good to go with it there. Let's see here. Colton says, LUT would be massive for professional work with clients when they ask for a burnt-in look. Also, for those of us doing advanced color workflows, for me, would have me always burning in log C. Yeah, so S5 Mark II, obviously, you know, with real-time LUT, you can burn in transform LUTs if you wanted. So yeah, you'd be able to have, you know, kind of control with that, so. I would also love to see it in my BGH1. Feels like a bit of a lost camera at this point, even though with it being a cine body, even though with it being the cine body in the line. So the box cameras, the BGH1 and the BS1H, I think there's a lot that's happening with those cameras that may not really be seeing that often in the public, because those cameras are being heavily adopted in productions. So remote productions, volumetric work, things like that. There's a lot of stuff. Like we've updated a lot with the control software and the tethering and things like that. It's just, that's the side of the business and side of the market that's really kind of adopted into that camera. So they're the ones that are kind of pushing through with the different varying supports. So let's see here. Thanks a lot for your time, and sorry the question kind of popped up twice. Keep up the good work. Love my S5 Mark II. Couldn't be more happy with switching from Olympus and Fuji to Pano with the S5 Mark II. Well, awesome. Love hearing that, Jack. So I've been using a highly rigged setup with the GH6 since it first launched. I've had an SSD setup I've intended to run for a while. I'm running into issues, though, that I also power the camera with USB PD in addition to the SSD. I've already been using a 20 gig PD hub in between the V-mount plate and the camera with no issue, but sadly it seems the camera won't attempt to use the SSD with it. That is correct. Because of the way SSD recording goes, the USB port has to be switched to either power or data. Cameras are much more simple than a PC or a laptop or a Mac would ever be. So the commands to do storage for the SSD they take priority. What you would end up doing in a case like this, if you want to power the camera and use USB SSD recording, is instead of using USB PD for power, you would use a V-mount plate and probably use something like, I know Condor makes a D-tap to the BLK22. We do not support, if something goes wrong with your camera and you're powering your camera that way, it's on you at that point, because it's not a formal Panasonic validated solution for it. But the DCC-17 and the AC-10 is the external power source that you would use to do a battery delete for the camera. And that would allow you to do SSD recording and power the camera and run everything off external power for your storage. But that would be probably the way you'd want to go for that setup. Thank you, YouTube. Speaking of power, what's the difference in recording time between SD, CF Express, and SSD? It's a very minor difference in recording time. SD cards, I believe, are going to give you the longest as far as power goes. CF Express cards run a little bit hot, actually run a lot hotter than SD cards, so heat actually reduces a lot of, theoretical time that you can record. But as far as power consumption goes, you're not really running into a lot of differences there. It's one of the reasons why, if you look at some drives, you'll see people have bad experiences where the drive just randomly disconnects, and that's usually because that drive is exceeding the power that's being allocated to the port to power that drive. Drives that we validate, as long as you use the drives that we validate, you shouldn't really have any loss in recording time, because you're using a different kind of media than SD cards. They've all been validated to work within the specifications that we've built for the camera. So, What I meant with flash, I don't see the actual live exposure change like I do without the flash, so I can't see how bright or dark the image is before using the flash. Yeah, so that really does just kind of come down to the fact that it's technically doing an actual exposure. It's actually, it is just completely turning off exposure preview because of the fact that your exposure is not going to be what the ISO and aperture and shutter values are, because you're going to be supplementing it with flashlight, like with light from the flash. So the system just doesn't run constant preview. It would be something that I think I'd have to have a deeper conversation with our engineers about, and then look at some examples to see how others may be doing it, because I don't know if there's different logics to which would the right way to be. Technically, the way we're doing it could be considered the correct way to do it, because the flash is your power source for the most part. If your exposure is set to a certain value, then you're going to fire flash in it. That value is what is going to be viewed there. But I will check in with our engineers and our team to see if there's any idea of a way to maybe change that, or shift a different logic for how live exposure preview shows up. Obi Wolf, any advice on why choosing C4K over 4K for the extra resolution and aspect ratio? Oh, yeah. Colton's asking for the extra resolution aspect ratio. Yeah, so C4K versus 4K, it's really just, it's down to which one you prefer. C4K is going to give you, if you put it on a standard UHD display, you're going to get letterbox, so you're going to have little black bars top and bottom. In fact, actually, I think I can show that. Yeah. So you see the black bars that are on top and bottom of this frame. It's because I'm in 17:9. If I were to come in here and change this to UHD, so if I go to 60p UHD, you get those black bars gone and you just fill it. So that's really the main difference. There are some cases where DCI or it's not really DCI, 17:9 aspect ratio is preferred, just because it's a 17:9 aspect ratio. Let's see here. Where did we go? There we go. Improvement suggestion. Instead of simply on-off for SSD recording, please let people choose between the photos and video functions separately. So this is one of the kind of, I think, confusion points as to what is going on when you are changing between SSD and internal storage on a camera. In order to record to the SSD with a camera, you have to straight up tell the camera, this is the destination for storage. That's why it takes a second to convert over and be able to record to an SSD. Think of this as with the cameras, when you want to change frequency and you want to go to, say, 24 hertz, you have to power the camera off and power it back on because the entire system frequency needs to change. Similar concept when it comes to SSD versus, SD or CF Express internal recording. They are two separate pipelines that the stored information has to go to. So you have to make a choice. Either you're going to go to SSD and everything's going to go to the SSD, or you're going to go internal and everything's going to go to SD cards or SD and CF Express. One of the things is that you can do external SSD recording and still send the signal out over your HDMI. So you could very easily do, say, ProRes recording to the SSD, and then to an external monitor also be sending in a full clean HDMI signal out, and then get your ProRes 422 backup on the external recorders as well. Let's see here. I think it's Chief Jobu. I think that's your name. If I've learned anything from my Ninja 5, it's that you really need to use the SSDs they validated, or you will have problems. That is correct. Definitely make sure that you are prioritizing using the actual drives that get validated. I had problems with a 4 terabyte SSD for a long time, but spent extra money on a validated one, and all my problems stopped. Smaller, yes, 2 terabyte for the same price, but it's worth it. So this ties right into the next kind of point I wanted to make. So We talk about SSDs. So this is that ProBlade. This is one of the SanDisk products. This is what's compatible with the Condor Blue handle that they came out with. And I have that lovely reflection that makes it hard to read. So this is probably my favorite drive solution in the entire industry right now. I use these for pretty much everything. I have a 1 terabyte that I use for the camera, and I have a couple 4 terabytes that I use for desktop storage because of the way their solution is implemented. The thing about SSDs, though, is that while you can find good deals on, say, a 4 terabyte SSD, you have to also now actually be very aware of what their read and write speeds are designated as. It is not uncommon to find a 1 terabyte drive that reads and writes much faster than a 4 terabyte drive, or even a 2 terabyte can read and write much faster than a 4 terabyte drive can. A lot of it comes down to the different technologies that are used for the layering of the storage and the data on it. So TLC, the different layers that are used. And what often happens is as you see much higher capacity drives showing up, and this is true for SD and CF Express as well, the higher the capacity, traditionally, the lower the read and write sustained speeds are because of the way the storage and the memory is done. If you think of CF Express cards or even NVMe drives, but the small ones, the real tiny ones, they usually have to get creative with the type of NAND flash that's being used on it, and in some cases they're typically slower so that they can be in a smaller package. Higher speed means higher heat, so in order to manage everything together, you start to run into where, you know, you can get thermal throttling on them. As far as speeds go, you can also run into other challenges where the buffers are just not built for it, so they're not built for the solutions like what we're using. So all of that being said, there's a reason why on the GH6 we validate only up to 2 terabyte, and anything over 2 terabyte doesn't get recognized by the camera. That's because typically anything over 2 terabyte is not actually going to be fast enough to record what we require them to be able to record when you're sending things like ProRes out to them. So be sure to take a look at the read and write speeds of the device that you're actually going to be working with, what their sustained read and write speeds are, and know that while yes, 4 terabytes would sound super cool to have, a lot of times you're giving up your speed to get the faster data rates, unless you're starting to work, and I know NVMe drives are getting much, much faster at 8 terabytes in storage. But for the most part, this style of drive, so portable drives, usually are not spec'd that way. The other thing is that the higher the capacity goes, the different USB standards get used, can also change the power consumption that those drives demand. So you want to make sure, again, this is why, and I'm going to harp on this a lot as we go through, the S5 Mark II X being released. You really, really want to make sure that if you are going to be buying drives for your camera, whether it's SD cards or SSDs, look at that drive list that we have validated for it. There is a reason we are validating it. I swear to you, it is not a, hey, we just like these brands or whatever. It is literally, these are what we know work, so you don't really have to worry out there, aside from manufacturer defects and products. You don't have to worry that that drive may just randomly disconnect on you. That's why we do not recommend the Samsung T7s at this time, because they can randomly disconnect when they spike power draw. So yeah, keep that in mind with all of the storage solutions that you take a look at. Let's see here. Where did we go? There we go. Will the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II X share the same firmware roadmap? Also, shout out to your Swedish colleague Martin Walgreen for a fantastic intro to videography course in Bergen, Norway. Awesome. Yeah. So the S5 Mark II and the Mark II X are different products. They have different firmware update schedules. They have different capabilities between the two of them. Core things about this, if you have been paying attention to the products, Mark II and the Mark II X, the S5 Mark II, its firmware update that it's getting is going to have access to RAW over HDMI, with the SFU2 unlock for that camera. That camera will not get all intra, the ProRes options, the streaming functionality, or the SSD recording. It does not get it. That's why we announced both of the cameras at the same time, because if those are features that were important to you or that you need, the S5 Mark II X is the camera that you got to go with at that point. The reason the original Mark II X is getting, or the original S5 Mark II is going to get raw over HDMI sports, well, because the original S5 had it, and yeah, if we want it, it's there. But ultimately, when we took the response that everyone was giving us when we did surveys and information and listened to the feedback from photographers and videographers, was that there are a very large number of people that do not want to be paying for features that they're never going to use. So yeah, well, there's the S5 Mark II. We can get a couple dollars cheaper than the Mark II X, but if you know that you need all those video functionalities, you got to go to the X. Because of that, they are two separate firmware paths. The S5 Mark II X will get its own firmware packages. The S5 Mark II will get its own firmware packages. So yeah, they will be different when you go through them. Let's see here. Sadly, though, a dummy battery is just a complete no-go for me at this point, having moved away from it after my GH5. Can you throw a link to the Panasonic dummy battery that works for the GH6? Yeah. I can drop that in there. Panasonic DCC 17. And these are actually what we've been using for our trade shows. Actually, we use our DCC 17 couplers for the GH6 and the S5 platforms because they've been super reliable for us during the shows. See coupler, because I can spell. There you go. Let's see here. Thanks. Definitely just very disappointing to hear that the USB hubs won't be supported in the near future, if ever. Yeah, USB hubs are there has to be logic to understand how to use the hubs and multiple inputs, and the USB ports on cameras in general just don't have the same processing power that a camera or that a computer or even a phone have. It is I think this is a big misunderstanding as to how powerful cameras actually are. Cameras are very powerful for specific things. Phones can be very powerful for multiple things. The camera processors are designed for image capture, for data storage, not for managing hub devices and all of this other stuff. Those are new things that maybe eventually one day they'll get there. But yeah, it's just the fact that they're different for the whole setup. Sebastian says, is USB streaming confirmed to work with 4K 30? I think it's going to depend on what you mean by streaming, Sebastian. Let's see here. How are the chances the L mount will open up for lens brands like Viltrox, Tamron, or others in the future? That's up to Leica. The L mount is primarily owned by Leica. It is licensed by Sigma, Panasonic, DJI, others to utilize, but we are all part of the L mount Alliance to discuss those kinds of things. So, but that's talking like way up the chain, way further up than I am, and have any influence on. So, you provide more information about the ProRes capabilities in the GH6, such as specific ProRes codecs that are available and any limitations or requirements for using ProRes on the camera. ProRes options on the GH6 here, honestly pretty straightforward. On the GH6, we offer in ProRes up to 5.7K at 30p. That it's going to give you 422HQ for the ProRes format. It's going to be 1.9 gigabits per second for the data rate. We also have HQ options, which are going to be typically a little bit lower bit rate. So you drop down from 1.9 to 1.3. In 3024, when you go to 4K, it's in Cinema 4K, so all of the 4K options are 17:9, and that gets you 1.3 gigabit in, various different options, and your full HDs are going to be 16:9. As far as capabilities go, limitation wise, the only limitations that really exist on ProRes are just down to which card storage you're going to use. Ideally, in a situation like that where you're going to be recording something like 1.9 gigabit, SSDs are going to be your best friend because they give you the best value per gig, so best dollar per gig cost. And at that point, you just have to work on what platform you want to use for mounting it to the camera. Like I said, traditionally, we've all been used to using stuff like this, where you've got, this is like the small rig T5 clamp that just mounts the drive here, and then it's plugged in the front here, and then the cord comes out and plugs into the camera. That's been the way that we've had to do it for a very long time. However, now I would say the most slick solution for being able to do SSD recording is, and if I was smart, I would have had this page loaded already. If you want to go with something that's probably the most slick and removes the most, I'd say, potential challenges or negatives for it would be to use, where is it? Accessories. Nope, not accessories. I want to go to handles and grips. Come on. There it is. All right, we're going to bring this up on screen here. This is probably the best solution I would say right now for SSD storage on the GH6. And probably, honestly, for the S5 Mark II X, but we still have to wait for confirmation on that one. This lets you use those Samsung ProBlade drives that I was showing before. Fits in the handle, lets you customize it, move it, shift it wherever you want to do. It could be a vertical or a top handle. Comes in different colors. This is probably the most elegant solution I can recommend for the for your storage solutions when it comes to SSD if you're working with ProRes. Let's see here. Thank you, YouTube. I honestly guess I will reconfigure long-term for CF Express, only workflow, and pull the SSD enclosure off the rig. Based on the answers, it's just never going to make sense for my workflow. And it's possible, you know, definitely there are challenges that, you know, I think as cameras are getting more and more advanced and as newer storage solutions are becoming readily available, this is the kind of stuff that I'd say as far as cameras go, we're kind of on that bleeding edge, because the mirrorless cameras like the S5 Mark II X, like the GH6, you know, they're designed for portability, travel, and run and gun. When you start going into rigging equipment up, that is where it starts to kind of go, not necessarily out of the design scope for, you know, what the cameras are made for. We know people are going to be rigging these cameras up and using them in what used to be done for traditional cinema cameras. But mirrorless cameras have to balance both the everyday user and the power user. So people like yourself. At this point, you know, things like hubs, I don't know of any camera that supports a hub for SSDs and power and all that kind of stuff, but it is something that you know, it is being looked at. We would definitely be pushing and seeing what kind of things you'd be able to do down the line with that. Let's see here. Third-party SSDs like M.2s with enclosures would theoretically work and not be stopped by the camera. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. As far as drives go, yeah, I mean, look, you can put any SSD drive you want on the camera. There's nothing that stops you from doing that. The reason we put the validated list out there is because we know that the range varies so much on storage drives, especially now that we're into SSDs. Because it varies so much, we at least have to have a platform that says, look, these are what we know are reliable. You want to use anything else out there, like your own M.2 drives and enclosures and stuff like that, go for it. just know that if those drives fail or you get corrupt files or they disconnect or things like that, it's kind of that's the reason we put the list out, because we know how these things respond. We have no idea how some of those other drives are going to respond until they get tested. So yeah, just keep that in mind while you're looking at the different kind of drives. Let's see here. Does Lumix have official LUTs for the GH6 or Vlog? Been having trouble grading footage as I'm not a professional colorist. We do have some official LUTs, but they're for Vlog in general. We have them on our global site. I can pull them up here and drop them in the chat for you. If I can pull the proper screen up. There it is. Let's do this. I want this one to go on the bottom, please. Go there. There, thank you. What do we have that under? So yeah, there are LUTs that do exist from us. Vlog Panasonic LUTs. Make sure I wrote that right. Vlog LUTs. So yeah, there are formal LUTs, but honestly, I would also recommend talking to people like Dennis, and some others like 55M, because there are some amazing LUTs that have been created by the community out there. They're not free, but honestly, if someone's put that much time and effort into doing it, you shouldn't expect them to be free. So I would highly recommend go taking a look at the community over in the Facebook group. Like I said, Dennis is one of the people that we've had on the stream before and talked about, looks and things like that. And there are some great LUTs there for working with. But just remember, LUTs are not magic bullets for fixing exposure and stuff like that. Exploring Norway says SanDisk ProBlade SSD, not Samsung. If I misspoke on that, I apologize to my friends at SanDisk and Samsung. But yes, those are SanDisk ProBlade SSDs. Obi Wolf says for S5, but I guess it works for the GH6. Yeah, DCC17 is for the BLK22 batteries. Yeah. Any plans to add 4.4K 60 in 4x3 or 4K 120 in ProRes internally? I'm not sure. I'd have to check and take a look and see what our engineers say about that. Just honestly not sure if those are something that are going to come for ProRes. Any chance of the GH6 getting those S5-2 walking IBIS algorithms? Not sure. Maybe. Right now we're in the phase of the S5 Mark II and the Mark II X, so a lot of times you'll see firmware updates, and we've talked about this before. Firmware updates come in phases. So you'll have, right now, because the Mark II and the Mark II X are the ones that we've talked about and obviously announced, and we had already stated what we were going to do for firmware with them. Those are priority. That has to come out. Anything else after that, it's in pipeline. It's in process for updates. There are always things that we're working to improve on. So yeah, it's just sometimes it takes a little bit longer than people may think, and a lot of times it's a lot harder to implement the things that people are asking for than it sounds like it should be, because I can guarantee the vast majority of us here have never written code for a camera before that's in production and needs to work no matter what you change to it. So, yeah. Are the Vlog LUTs from Panasonic optimized for 8-bit or 10-bit? They're optimized for 10-bit because they're originally designed on the Vericam and the EVA series. On the topic of anamorphic, on a 35mm Sirui 1.33 lens, can you go through how to set the lens up on the GH6? Do you have to use 4x3 scale and de-stretch in post? ProRes does not have 4x3 scale. Yeah, so anamorphic lenses, for one, the 1:3:3 aspect ratio lenses are typically designed for a 16:9 capture. You probably wouldn't use a 1:3:3 on a 2x D-squeeze. Because you will get a pencil thin letterbox out of that, or on a 4x3. It may not look 100% right. However, if you were to set this to say, let's do C4K is fine for this. So say let's do C4K. So we've got it there. When it comes to the anamorphic functionality, when you scroll down in our settings, you'll see that we have tools for anamorphic. I just have to remember where they are because I can't remember the last time I've shot anamorphic. Anamorphic D-squeeze display. So we can turn this on and you'll see you have 133. So that will do the D-squeeze of that display. And then you also have the options for stabilization settings on it as well. So I can come into image stabilization, go into anamorphic, change this to 133, and now the stabilizer is tuned for that. So right now it's got a 133 D-squeeze being associated to it. But I will come up, let's change this to, let's go to ProRes. Or let's go to MOV. Sorry, not ProRes. So if we go here, and I turn on my D-squeeze, it'll do 133. The thing with 133 is you're not seeing it on the screen here below me because anamorphic D-squeeze does not send out over HDMI. It only views on the camera itself. So if you're sending it out over HDMI, you would have to use the monitor to do the D-squeeze preview to kind of show it to you. But at that point, it's a matter of the lens that you're using and the ratio that you want to get in post, David. So, like I said, most 133 lenses were designed in coverage for 16:9 aspect ratio sensors to get you that kind of CinemaScope look. If you use 4:3, it'll still work. You're just going to get a very different aspect ratio. It depends on what you want to go for on the output for anamorphic. Let's see here. JC, are the Samsung T7 and T7 Shields now compatible with the GH6? I know they were testing a few months ago. Unfortunately, no. T7s are still troublesome. T7s seem to be troublesome with pretty much any camera. My understanding is they draw a lot of power, and that's where you can run into problems as to why they randomly disconnect for some people. It's just, yeah, T7s are going to take a while to be able to be formally validated. I know some people that are working fine with them, and I know others that are just having nightmares using them. So that's why we don't recommend them. Let's see here. Let's see. The AC10 is an AC adapter, which I do not want. I want an external battery, and some do have taps on them, but the camera voltage is kept well secret. No. Is possible to use with external battery. There's cable converters on the market, but those are third-party products, so be careful. I use it with USB-C, V-mount, and a converter. Battery voltage is 7.2 volt. Yeah, the voltage that we have on the batteries is not hidden. I mean, it's written on the batteries. Yeah, it's the biggest thing when it comes to any kind of power solution with cameras is you really got to be careful. There are, and I saw it at NAB this year. I saw a camera that got plugged into a V-mount battery that had some janky third-party, no-name brand adapter. Plugged it into the camera. Camera worked fine for a split second and then turned off and never turned back on again because there's no voltage regulation. And if you take a V-Lock battery that's sending 14 volts or 16 volts, right out, you then run into problems where you just basically fried the camera. So you really got to be careful when it comes to power solutions on the cameras. What else? I didn't mean to imply it would be easy. Oh, no, that's okay. I hopefully when I respond, I tend to respond very matter of fact with some things. So hopefully it doesn't offend anybody that I definitely know that no one implies that that kind of stuff's easy. Did I get the rest of those questions that were there? Please get the ones recommended. To save some time, please get the ones they recommend, or you will have issues like I did forever. It's back and forth with Atomos and SSD problems until I got the one they recommended. Yeah. I know, especially these days, it sounds like, hey, they're only recommending things that, they like or whatever, but no. Genuinely, the reason we validate is because we hate the headaches as well. It doesn't help us to just say, use whatever drive you want and then have our call center get inundated with people saying, hey, it's not working. We work with trusted professionals and trusted brands on this kind of stuff. And again, I know I'm harping on the SanDisk stuff. It's just been the best solution so far. That's not to say that on my one kit that I use here, that the T5 drive is not a good solution. It works. The only thing is that when you use something like this, you've got the cable coming off, cable coming in here. There's so many areas where you could run into having, a cable get pulled or snapped or broken off. Those ProBlade drives just make it easier to not have to worry about a USB cable coming out on the drive side. And these are designed for being taken in and out of the cameras all the time. So yeah, cool. Let's see here. There's some more expensive specific ones out there which just work, but technically the pinouts are the same as Canon flash, so modification Canon extension cable would work. Not even gonna go back and look at what that one was because I think I know what you're talking about. But otherwise, like I said, yeah, this was a lot of just numbers and details thrown out like that for this entire stream. Thank you everybody for spending the time with us. These are fun streams. I like doing them. We're gonna come back again live next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'm still working out on the schedule there. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about some cool stuff. And yeah, other than that, if you like the conversation, if you've got questions after the stream, be sure to drop them in the comments after the video goes. What's that? Content with the S5 2X so far? Oh. You mean this one? Yes, this is possibly my favorite camera so far. Be on the lookout for more information about this stuff, about this particular camera shortly. But otherwise, yes, what was I saying? Thank you all so much for tuning in. We will be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Various different topics. If you've got questions in the meantime, make sure to drop them down in the chat. If we didn't get to your question, drop it down in the comment section afterwards. We do have comments moderated because we've had some fairly nasty comments, not product related, just spam comments get thrown up there. So things are moderated. I go through them, once every day or so and approve all the ones that aren't like, hey, check out this website stuff. So definitely leave us your comments. We do read them. It'll help us build future streams for the next one. Other than that, thanks y'all. Hope you have a great rest of your day, great weekend. Subscribe, hit like, bell icon, all that fun stuff. And see y'all next Thursday, 2 p.m. That was probably the worst send-off I've done in a long time. So I'm going to end it here. Talk to y'all later. Bye.